Police thought they had power when they cuffed a Latino sergeant at home, but 10 minutes later, the military showed them what real power looks like. The small-town streets of Meadowbrook were unusually quiet that Friday afternoon. A light drizzle hung in the air, dampening the sidewalks, but it did nothing to soften the hard stares of the 3 police officers parked near the corner diner. Officers Jenkins, Rowe, and Daniels were known throughout the town not for their service but for their swagger. Men who wore their badges like shields of unchecked authority. That's when she walked past. Her boots struck the wet pavement with precision. Steady, confident, the rhythm of someone who had walked in formation for years. Her uniform was pressed, her insignia shining faintly under the dim light. She carried herself with discipline, but also with a quiet dignity. To most passers-by, she was just a soldier heading home. But to Jenkins and his crew, she was an opportunity. "Look at this one," Jenkins muttered, nudging Rowe. "Walking around like she owns the place. That uniform doesn't mean squat here." Rowe smirked. "Bet she thinks she's better than us. Time someone showed her who's really in charge." The 3 men got out of their cruiser, boots splashing through puddles. She noticed them instantly. Years of training had sharpened her senses. She stiffened slightly but kept walking, determined not to engage. But their voices followed. "Hey!" Jenkins barked. "Stop right there." She turned slowly, eyes steady, expression unreadable. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice carried both politeness and steel. "Problem? Yeah, there's a problem," Rowe sneered, circling her. "You walking around in that uniform like you're on patrol. You can't just stroll into our town playing soldier. Let me see some ID." She raised an eyebrow. "This is a U.S. Army uniform, and I'm not playing anything. Respectfully, I don't have to show you ID unless you have reasonable suspicion." That single word, respectfully, stung. To men like Jenkins and his crew, it sounded like defiance wrapped in politeness. "Don't get smart with me," Jenkins growled. "Hands where I can see 'em. You might be carrying something." "I'm not carrying anything but my service bag," she replied, tightening her grip on the strap. "And you're overstepping your authority." That was all it took. Jenkins' temper flared. "Overstepping? Lady, I am the authority here." He shoved her against the hood of their cruiser. Rowe quickly moved in, yanking her arms behind her back with a force that made her wince. "You can't do this," she protested. "I'm a sergeant in the United States Army." Daniels, the youngest of the trio, hesitated. "Jenkins, maybe we should." "Shut up and cuff her," Jenkins snapped. "Lesson number 1. That uniform don't impress me." Cold steel clamped around her wrists. For the first time in years, she felt the sting of humiliation. Not because she was restrained, she had endured worse during training exercises, but because she was being treated like a criminal in the very country she had sworn to protect. Pedestrians slowed, some pulling out phones, others whispering. But fear kept most of them from intervening. The sight of a Latina soldier, handcuffed and pushed into the back of a police car, burned into their memories. She sat silently in the cruiser, raindrops streaking down the window beside her. Her mind was racing, but her face remained calm. Years in combat zones had taught her the power of patience. Inside, though, she seethed. These men have no idea what they've just done. They think this is about ego. They think this is about control. But one call is all it will take to unravel their world. Jenkins leaned against the driver's side door, smirking at the growing crowd. "See? Just another loudmouth who thought a uniform gave her rights." Rowe chuckled. "Yeah, she'll learn quick," but Daniels looked uneasy. He kept glancing at the soldier through the partition glass, catching her steady gaze. There was something unsettling about it. Not fear, not anger. Just a quiet confidence that made him question whether they had just made the worst mistake of their careers. The Latina sergeant finally spoke, her voice carrying through the car's thin barrier. "You're making a mistake, a serious one. I'll give you one chance to take these cuffs off and walk away." Jenkins laughed so hard he nearly doubled over. "Oh, that's rich. What are you gonna do, soldier? Call your mommy at the Pentagon? Her lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Something like that. The drizzle turned to steady rain. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, though unrelated. The town seemed to hold its breath. For Jenkins and his men, this was just another day of flexing power. For her, it was the beginning of something much larger, the calm before the storm. And in that moment, even cuffed, soaked in rain and shoved, in the back of a cruiser, she knew exactly how this story would end, with their careers in ashes. The cruiser rattled down Meadowbrook's main street, windshield wipers smearing raindrops into blurry streaks. Inside, the Latina sergeant sat upright in the back seat, her hands cuffed tightly behind her. The interior smelled of stale coffee and leather, but she paid no attention. Her mind was sharp, calculating, every detail filed away for later. Officer Jenkins drove with one hand on the wheel, his posture dripping arrogance. Rowe rode shotgun, fiddling with the radio like it was any other Friday patrol. Daniel sat stiff in the back, diagonally across from the sergeant, his knee bouncing nervously. He kept stealing glances at her, but she never broke eye contact. It was unsettling, the kind of steady, disciplined stare you only saw in combat. Veterans. "You've got a hell of a nerve, soldier," Jenkins said, his voice filled with scorn. "Think that uniform makes you untouchable? Out here it doesn't mean squat. This is my town. You answer to me." The sergeant tilted her head slightly, as if amused. "Funny. Last I checked, every officer in this country answers to the Constitution, not to their ego." Rowe twisted around in his seat, glaring. "You better watch your mouth. You're cuffed. That means you're in no position to lecture anyone." "Cuffed," she said evenly. "Sure, but don't mistake restraint for weakness. You're assuming the chains make you powerful. All they really do is reveal who you are when you think no one can stop you." The words stung, and Rowe clenched his fists. Jenkins grinned, enjoying the verbal sparring. "You've got a sharp tongue. Let's see how sharp it is when you're sitting in a holding cell. Maybe we'll book you for resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, hell, maybe impersonating an officer." Daniels finally spoke up. "Jenkins, she's clearly military. That uniform's not fake." "So what?" Jenkins shot back. "She thinks it puts her above the law. I'm teaching her otherwise." The sergeant leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. "You're not teaching me anything. What you're doing is violating federal law. Assaulting and unlawfully detaining a member of the armed forces carries consequences you can't even imagine." For the first time, Rowe hesitated. He wasn't as hardened as Jenkins. "Federal law?" he muttered. "Yes," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "You've crossed a line that could end your careers, and the longer you push this, the worse it gets." Jenkins slammed a hand against the steering wheel. "Don't try to scare me with your big talk. You're in my car, in my cuffs. You don't get to make threats." Her tone never wavered. Calm, composed, every word deliberate. "Not a threat. A fact. One phone call is all it takes. One call, and everything you think you control comes crashing down." The car fell silent for a moment, except for the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of the wipers. Daniel's throat tightened as he studied her face. She wasn't bluffing, he could tell. There was too much certainty, too much quiet conviction. Rowe scoffed, trying to shake off the unease. "Yeah, right, who you gonna call? The president?" The sergeant's lips twitched into the faintest smirk. "Closer than you think." Jenkins barked a laugh. "This is hilarious. She thinks she's got some hotline to the big shots in D.C. Newsflash. You're in cuffs, sweetheart." "You're nobody right now." "Then why?" she said, her eyes piercing through him in the rearview mirror. "Do I feel so calm, and you're the one trying to convince yourself you're in control?" Jenkins' jaw tightened, the grin faltering. The cruiser pulled into the back lot of the Meadowbrook Police Department, a squat brick building that looked more like an old warehouse than a station. The rain had turned into a steady downpour, beating against the hood in heavy drops. Jenkins parked roughly, threw the car into park, and stepped out with exaggerated bravado. Rowe yanked open the back door and pulled her out, shoving her toward the building. Despite the cuffs, she walked with measured dignity, her spine straight, her gaze forward. The sight unnerved Daniels, who followed behind. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over cracked linoleum floors. A bored desk sergeant raised an eyebrow as the trio dragged in their prisoner. "What's this?" the desk officer asked. "Disturbing the peace. Resisting," Jenkins said curtly. The sergeant in uniform arched an eyebrow. "Interesting charges, for someone who was walking home from duty." The desk officer hesitated, eyeing her fatigues. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but Jenkins's reputation was enough to silence his doubts. He slid paperwork across the counter without a word. They led her into a small interrogation room, empty except for a table and 2 chairs. The walls were bare, painted a dull beige that had seen better years. Jenkins pushed her into a chair, the cuffs still biting into her wrists. "Sit tight," he said mockingly. "We'll decide what to do with you." The Latina soldier leaned back, her eyes scanning the room before settling on Jenkins. "You've already decided? You've decided to gamble your badges on a power trip. Now you'll lose everything?" Jenkins leaned down, his face inches from hers. "You don't scare me." She didn't flinch. "That's because you're too arrogant to recognize when you should be scared." Rowe chuckled nervously, but Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. He'd been a cop for only 4 years, and never had he seen someone so composed under pressure. Most people cuffed and dragged into this room were angry, desperate, or broken. But this woman radiated something else: authority, calm, and a quiet certainty that didn't fit the script. "You've got one call," Jenkins finally sneered. "Go ahead, make it. I want to see this big favor you think you've got in Washington." The sergeant lowered her voice, almost a whisper. "You'll regret those words." And for the first time since the encounter began, a flicker of doubt passed across Jenkins' hardened features. The small interrogation room felt heavy with tension. The buzz of the fluorescent light above filled the silence, every flicker punctuating the stillness. The Latina sergeant sat composed in her chair, the steel cuffs biting into her wrists, but not her resolve. Across the table, Jenkins leaned back with smug satisfaction, while Rowe stood with arms crossed, trying to mirror his partner's bravado. Daniels lingered near the door, restless, his conscience gnawing at him. Jenkins finally broke the silence. "Well, you've got one call. Better make it count." His tone dripped with mockery, as if daring her to embarrass herself. The sergeant's eyes locked on him with unshaken calm. "I intend to." Rowe slid a battered landline across the table, the cord tangled like the careers they were tying themselves into. Jenkins smirked. "Let's see who answers. Maybe your landlord, or your local recruiter." Ignoring him, she carefully dialed a number, her bound hands working awkwardly but precisely. Each beep echoed in the room, like the countdown of a clock ticking toward judgment. Daniel swallowed hard, sensing that something irreversible was about to unfold. The line clicked. A crisp, authoritative voice came through instantly. "Sergeant Morales, this is command. Do you require assistance?" The officers froze. It wasn't a casual greeting, nor a generic voice. It was sharp, disciplined, military. Morales's tone shifted slightly, professional, yet urgent. "This is Sergeant First Class, Elena Morales, 75th Ranger Regiment. I've been unlawfully detained by 3 local officers in Meadowbrook without charge, while in full uniform. They've used excessive force, and I am currently restrained, requesting immediate escalation and confirmation of protocol." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the voice on the other end replied, steel in every syllable. "Understood, Sergeant. Do not resist further. Maintain composure. Command is initiating response. Stay on the line." Jenkins' smirk faltered. "What the hell did she just say?" He whispered, though his voice cracked. Rowe's eyes widened. "Wait, 75th Ranger Regiment? That's..." Morales cut him off with a steady stare. "That's a unit you never want to mess with." The voice on the phone grew sharper, louder. Others were clearly on the line now. "Sergeant Morales, confirm. Are you in restraints? Yes. Steel handcuffs, wrists behind my back? She answered evenly, eyes never leaving Jenkins. There was a pause. Then a different voice came through, deeper, authoritative, the kind that carried weight even through static. This is Colonel Harrison, Commanding Officer, 75th Ranger Regiment. Sergeant, you have our full attention. Remain calm. We will handle this immediately. The air in the room shifted. Jenkins' arrogance melted into unease. Rowe's posture sagged. Daniel's face went pale. Colonel? Jenkins muttered suddenly, unsure. The colonel's voice cut through the phone, booming even across distance. Identify the officers responsible. Names, badge numbers, everything. Morales didn't hesitate. Her voice was clear, deliberate, and damning. Officers Jenkins, Rowe and Daniels. Meadowbrook Police Department. Daniels flinched, his heart hammering. He opened his mouth to protest, but Morales's gaze silenced him. On the line, rapid typing and muffled commands could be heard in the background. The colonel returned. Copy. That. Local PD leadership has been notified. Military liaison is en route. JAG Corps and federal oversight will be on site within the hour. Sergeant, do you require medical? No, sir. Morales replied firmly. Only justice. Her words struck like a hammer in the room. Jenkins tried to regain his footing, slamming a fist on the table. This is ridiculous. You're calling in the Army over a routine arrest? The colonel's voice thundered back, every syllable laced with fury. Officer Jenkins, you have unlawfully detained a decorated Army Ranger in full uniform. You have assaulted a federal service member. That is not a routine arrest. That is a career-ending violation of federal law. You will remain exactly where you are until my people arrive. Do you understand? Jenkins' face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Rowe muttered under his breath. We're screwed. Daniels backed against the wall, trembling. He wasn't innocent, but he hadn't pushed, hadn't shoved, hadn't. Still, his silence had made him complicit, and now the weight of that silence bore down like chains heavier than the cuffs on Morales's wrists. Morales leaned slightly forward, her voice steady. You thought the uniform meant nothing. I was powerless here. You were wrong. That uniform connects me to an entire chain of command that doesn't take kindly to abuse. The colonel added, his tone final. Sergeant Morales, hold position. Do not allow them to relocate you. Response teams are inbound. Yes, sir, she replied, calm as stone. The phone clicked as the line held open, distant voices barking orders in the background. Jenkins rubbed his temples, pacing the room. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Rowe leaned against the wall, muttering curses, his bravado evaporating. Daniels finally spoke, his voice shaking. Jenkins, we messed up. We really messed up. She wasn't bluffing. Shut up, Jenkins snapped, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He turned to Morales, desperation replacing arrogance. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. We can work this out. Morales, eyes narrowed. You had your chance. I gave you an out on the street. You mocked it. You chose arrogance over reason. The door opened suddenly. The desk sergeant poked his head in, eyes wide. Jenkins? You better come out here. What? No? Jenkins barked. The man's voice was hushed, shaken. There's military outside, and federal suits. Already. Jenkins froze. Rowe cursed. Daniels covered his face with his hands. Morales simply leaned back in her chair, the faintest trace of a victorious smile playing on her lips. One call, she said softly. That's all it takes. The atmosphere inside the Meadowbrook Police Department shifted from smug certainty to suffocating dread in an instant. The hum of conversation in the lobby had gone silent, drowned out by the heavy, synchronized thud of boots on wet pavement outside. The sound grew louder, more disciplined than any small-town officer had ever heard. Sergeant Elena Morales sat calmly in the interrogation room, still cuffed, but every inch of her radiated quiet control. Jenkins paced like a caged animal. Rowe leaned against the wall muttering, and Daniel stood frozen near the door, his palms sweating. The desk sergeant's words echoed in their minds. There's military outside, and federal suits. The first to enter wasn't a soldier but a man in a dark suit, polished shoes clicking against the linoleum. His badge flashed under the fluorescent light. Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. His expression was a mask of controlled fury, the kind that made hardened men falter. Behind him came two uniformed MPs, their crisp army dress uniforms spotless despite the rain. And then, as if to hammer in the gravity of the moment, three more figures entered, men and women in black suits with earpieces, federal agents whose eyes scanned every corner of the room. Officers Jenkins, Rowe, Daniels, the DOJ inspector announced, voice cutting like steel. Step away from Sergeant Morales immediately, Jenkins tried to bluster. Now wait just a damn minute. Now, the inspector snapped, his tone brooking no argument. Rowe stumbled backward, his face pale. Daniels complied instantly, relief flickering in his expression. Only Jenkins resisted, clenching his fists, his pride refusing to let go. The two MPs moved forward without hesitation. In one fluid motion, they uncuffed Morales and pulled her to her feet. She straightened, rolled her shoulders, and adjusted her uniform. The red marks on her wrists were the only visible reminder of what had happened. But her bearing was untouched. Regal, disciplined, commanding. Sergeant Morales, one MP said respectfully, "You're safe now. Colonel Harrison has command of the situation." "Thank you, Corporal," she replied, nodding firmly. The DOJ inspector turned back to the officers. "Do you three understand what you've done? You unlawfully detained a member of the United States military in full uniform. That is not only a violation of her civil rights, it is a direct breach of federal law." Rowe stammered, his words tumbling over themselves. We didn't know she was—" "Didn't know?" The inspector cut in sharply. "You put cuffs on a decorated ranger sergeant in broad daylight while she identified herself, and you mocked her warnings. That's not ignorance, that's arrogance." Jenkins slammed a hand on the table, voice cracking. "She disrespected us. She thought she was above the law." The room went still. The inspector's eyes narrowed. "No, she was the law you swore to uphold, and you spat on it." Outside, more boots struck the pavement. The MPs weren't alone. A convoy had arrived. Through the window, the glow of headlights revealed military vehicles flanking the police cruisers. Dozens of soldiers formed a perimeter, their presence a silent reminder of who truly held power in this country when the chain of command was invoked. Daniels finally broke. His voice shook, but he couldn't stay silent any longer. "Sir, I didn't push her. I didn't touch her. I told Jenkins we should back off." The inspector cut him off coldly. "You stood by. You allowed this to happen. Silence is complicity." Daniel's shoulders slumped. There was no escape, no rationalization left. One of the MPs handed Morales her phone. She quickly dialed, and within seconds, Colonel Harrison's voice boomed from the speaker. "Sergeant Morales, report." "Unharmed, sir. Situation under federal control. Officers responsible are present," she replied crisply. "Outstanding. Hold position. DOJ and JAG will finalize charges. Command out." She ended the call and looked directly at Jenkins. Her voice was calm, almost quiet, but each word cut deeper than any shout. "I warned you. I told you one call would change everything. You thought I was bluffing. You thought the cuffs made me powerless." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "But the real power was never in the cuffs. It was in the truth. And the people who stand behind me." Jenkins opened his mouth, but nothing came. His face flushed red with shame, sweat dripping down his temple. Rowe looked sick, clutching his stomach like he might vomit. Daniels just stared at the floor, defeated. The inspector signaled the MPs. "Officers Jenkins, Rowe, Daniels, you are hereby relieved of duty pending federal investigation. Hand over your badges and service weapons now." Rowe fumbled to comply, hands shaking as he unpinned his badge and set it on the table. Daniels did the same, his movements slow, as if each gesture stripped away part of his identity. Jenkins resisted until the last possible moment. He pulled his badge off with trembling hands and slammed it onto the table. "This is a damn witch hunt," he spat. The inspector's gaze didn't waver. "No, Officer Jenkins. This is accountability." Two federal agents stepped forward and cuffed the three officers. Ironic, poetic justice. This time it was they who felt the cold steel biting their wrists. Morales stood free and proud, watching the men who had mocked her reduced to silence. For a moment she said nothing. But as Jenkins was led past her, she leaned close enough for him alone to hear. "You thought you could humiliate me. You thought the uniform meant nothing. Remember this feeling, Jenkins. Because your career ends today. And mine continues." His eyes widened, fury and fear colliding inside him. But he couldn't respond. The rain outside had slowed, the storm breaking into a light drizzle. Soldiers stood at attention as the disgraced officers were marched out of the building, their boots splashing in puddles. Cameras flashed. Reporters had arrived, alerted by the sudden military presence. In the morning, the entire nation would see the images: small-town officers led away in cuffs, and a Latina ranger standing tall, vindicated. Morales stepped into the lobby, her uniform immaculate despite the ordeal. The sight of her drew a hush from the crowd. Some civilians who had witnessed the initial arrest were there, eyes wide with vindication. A woman whispered, "That's her. That's the soldier they cuffed." And then, slowly, a ripple of applause spread. The inspector glanced at her, his tone softening. "Sergeant Morales, would you like to file your report here or wait until we're back at the base?" She lifted her chin. "Here. The sooner the record shows what happened, the better." The inspector nodded, spoken like a ranger. As Morales walked back toward the office to begin her statement, she passed the holding cells where Jenkins, Rowe, and Daniels now sat, their eyes hollow. They had mocked her composure hours earlier. Now she walked free while they sat caged. Dusk. Irony was complete, and the fallout had only just begun. The storm over Meadowbrook didn't end with the rain. The true reckoning came in the weeks that followed, and it was far more devastating than Jenkins, Rowe, or Daniels could have imagined. The night of the arrest spread across the nation like wildfire. Cell phone videos captured the image of Sergeant Elena Morales in her Army Ranger uniform, hands cuffed behind her back, being shoved into a squad car. Another clip showed the military convoy rolling into the small-town police station, federal agents marching out with the disgraced officers in cuffs. By morning, major networks ran the story under headlines like, "Army Ranger Sergeant illegally arrested in Meadowbrook. DOJ launches investigation." For Morales, it was vindication. For the officers, it was the beginning of the end. The investigation. The Department of Justice wasted no time. Internal Affairs had always known Jenkins and Rowe had disciplinary complaints, unnecessary force, racial profiling, intimidation tactics. But nothing ever stuck. The small-town network of silence had always shielded them. This time there was no shield. The evidence was undeniable, the witnesses plentiful, and the victim not just a civilian but a highly decorated soldier with federal backing. Jenkins faced the heaviest charges: unlawful detention, assault on a federal service member, deprivation of rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. Rowe was charged as an accomplice, his own aggression during the arrest captured on camera. Daniel's case was murkier. He hadn't laid a hand on Morales, but he hadn't stopped it either. Federal prosecutors labeled him complicit through willful inaction. Their badges were suspended indefinitely. Pay stopped, benefits frozen. The thin veneer of authority they had carried for years evaporated overnight. The courtroom was packed when proceedings began. Reporters filled every bench, their cameras flashing outside as crowds gathered. Veterans groups showed up in solidarity, holding American flags and signs reading, "Respect our soldiers." Morales sat at the witness stand in full uniform. The ribbons on her chest told a story no one in the room could deny. Combat deployments, years of service, sacrifices that outweighed the ego of any small-town cop. The defense tried to paint the arrest as a misunderstanding, arguing that The officers didn't realize who she was, but Morales' testimony cut through their excuses. "I identified myself as Sergeant Morales," she told the court, her voice steady. "I told them I was returning from duty. They ignored me. They mocked me. They put me in cuffs because they wanted to remind me that their power mattered more than my service. They weren't enforcing the law. They were abusing it." The prosecution played the recordings. Jenkins' mocking laughter, Rowe's sneering threats, Morales' calm warnings. The jury didn't need long to see the truth. Jenkins was convicted on all counts. Rowe followed. Daniels pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, hoping for leniency, but his badge was gone for good. The sentences, Jenkins received the harshest punishment: 5 years in federal prison, followed by a lifetime ban from ever working in law enforcement. Rowe was sentenced to 3 years, his career in ruins. Daniels escaped prison time but walked out of court with probation, a tarnished record and no future in uniform. Their names, once spoken with fear in Meadowbrook, became synonymous with disgrace. The sight of them leaving the courthouse in shackles was broadcast nationwide, a stark reversal of the arrogance they had displayed the day they cuffed Morales. The aftermath for Morales, for Sergeant Elena Morales, the weeks that followed were not easy. She endured interviews, scrutiny, and the weight of retelling the story over and over. Yet through it all, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had shown that first night in the rain. The Army commended her restraint and professionalism under pressure. The Pentagon issued a formal statement condemning the actions of the officers, reaffirming that an attack on one of our soldiers is an attack on the integrity of the nation itself. She was awarded a commendation medal for her composure and her unwavering commitment to the values of service even while in chains. But more than medals, it was the voices of ordinary Americans that reached her most. Letters poured in from veterans, from families of service members, from strangers who had watched the story unfold. One letter read simply, "You reminded us that dignity is stronger than cruelty. Thank you." The town of Meadowbrook itself was never the same. The police department fell under federal oversight. The chief resigned in disgrace. Training programs were overhauled. For the first time in years, residents felt safe to speak openly about the harassment they had endured. Under Jenkins and Rowe, one woman stood outside the courthouse with tears in her eyes. "For years they scared us," she said to a reporter. "But it took one soldier standing tall even in cuffs to bring them down." Jenkins, Rowe, and Daniels, for the disgraced officers, life unraveled quickly. In prison, Jenkins discovered that arrogance earned him no favors. Word spread fast about why he was there, abusing a soldier in uniform. Other inmates, many of them veterans themselves, made his days long and bitter. His swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. Rowe fared little better. His family distanced themselves, ashamed of the headlines. Old friends avoided his calls. When he was finally released, he found doors closed everywhere he turned. No department would hire him. No badge would ever rest on his chest again. Daniels, though spared prison, carried the heaviest weight in silence. He replayed that night endlessly, her calm warnings, his own inaction. He took odd jobs, tried to disappear into anonymity, but guilt shadowed every step. Unlike Jenkins or Rowe, Daniels didn't rage against the world. He raged against himself. Months later, Morales stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., invited to speak at a veterans event. The hall was filled with service members, families, and officials. Cameras broadcast her words nationwide. "I didn't choose to be cuffed that night," she began, "but I chose how to respond. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the strength this uniform represents. Those cuffs didn't weaken me. They revealed the weakness of those who placed them on me. And they reminded all of us that the rule of law doesn't bend for arrogance." The crowd rose to its feet, applause thunderous. Veterans saluted. Families wept. That night, as she walked off stage, Morales realized something profound. The incident had not defined her. It had elevated her. Her name, once spoken by 3 officers with mockery, was now spoken with respect across the country. Jenkins, Rowe, and Daniels were never heard of again in law enforcement circles. Their careers were over, their reputations ashes. They had thought, one woman in cuffs was powerless. Instead, they discovered that one phone call could strip them of everything. Sergeant Elena Morales continued to serve, her resolve stronger than ever. Each time she laced her boots and straightened her uniform, she remembered that night in Meadowbrook, not as a moment of humiliation, but as proof of resilience. In the end, the lesson was clear. Badges may tarnish, arrogance may crumble, but honor endures, and the end of their careers was only the beginning of her legacy.